Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Some Stops Along the Way, your podcast that highlights some of the most interesting countries in the world through the lens of my work there and also focuses on their history, culture, and geopolitics. Glad you could join us this morning. I know that you're joining this morning probably thinking we're going to start our new thematic area, times of joy and times of sorrow. But we're going to start that actually next week because today I wanted to do an episode to answer a couple of questions that I've received from viewers. Uh, I've had a few people reach out to me and ask, what are some of the weirdest flight experiences that you've had around the world? And I thought, oh, is this really the forum to do this? But the question keeps coming up and people seem to be interested. So I wanted to do an episode on it today. And then we'll start next week. We'll start the thematic area, times of joy and times of sorrow, with a brand new country. So let's jump into this. I thought a lot about it. And actually, it was fun to go back and have memories of some of those strange and hapless flights that I've had around the world. But I'm going to identify 11 today and briefly run through them with you. And number 11 is a Delta flight that I took in 2023 from Atlanta to Warsaw. Now, the flight itself was inconsequential, it was a normal flight. But what happened before the flight was what makes this unique. I left Chattanooga, Tennessee on a shuttle bus that I've taken many times before to go to the Atlanta airport to catch my flight to Warsaw, and then I was going to be in Warsaw a few days, and then be driven into Ukraine. I had very high level meetings in both Warsaw and Ukraine. By high level, I mean with senior government officials, minister level government officials, deputy prime minister, etc. So this was an important trip. And so I get to the international terminal in Atlanta's Hartsfield Jackson International Airport. And the shuttle bus had stopped at the domestic terminal first and let off some passengers. And so by the time we got to the international terminal, it was only myself and one couple that was left. So we got out of the van. I go around to the back. The driver gives the couple their luggage. They go off about their business. And then he hands me a suitcase, and it's not mine. And I looked at it for a moment, shocked, and I looked at him and said, "This is not my suitcase. Not even close. It's not even the same color. It's not the same size, nothing." And we realized that one of the domestic passengers had inadvertently taken my suitcase. So what makes this even funnier is that I usually don't travel casual. If I'm traveling, I usually travel business class. And so I usually traveled in at least khakis and a sports shirt and dress shoes. But on this particular day, for whatever reason, I decided to wear jeans and some Ariat shoes that were kind of multicolored and just a knit shirt. And so I realized that this is bad. I'm going to meet with government officials. I have no bag to take. And so I go in to check in. Delta calls over to the domestic terminal, and all the bags over there have been checked. So even if my bag was there, which it was, they couldn't retrieve it from Southwest Airlines. Long story short, I have to fly to Warsaw with no bag. I literally have the clothes on my back and the ones that I bought in the airport. I bought a sport coat, a dress shirt, and a pair of nice jeans in the airport. They didn't have any shoes. And so I fly to Warsaw with literally a sack of new clothes with the tag still on them and what I'm wearing. And the first thing that I had to do was a meeting with our team. I told them the story. They thought it was quite funny. And so that afternoon after the team meeting, I went to one of the malls in Warsaw and I bought, some socks and underwear and a couple pair of jeans, a pair of shoes that looked halfway decent, and went on into Ukraine. And so for the rest of that trip, I wore one sport coat, one dress shirt, some nice jeans, and the nicest shoes that I could find in Warsaw to all these meetings with senior government officials. And I thought it was going to be apocalyptic, but actually it turned out to be something that was a real icebreaker with these government officials. They thought it was quite funny, actually. I met with the U.S. ambassador looking like I had just stepped out of, a club rather than dressing for a meeting with a senior diplomat. And everybody thought it was quite funny. And it turned out that it worked to my advantage because I still have some great relationships in Ukraine today where they will remind me, you remember the first time we met? And I literally traveled all over Poland and Ukraine with a plastic bag of clothes that almost all of which I had purchased on my way there. I did eventually get my bag back. It was an ordeal. Unfortunately, the shuttle company who had made the mistake, the driver had given the wrong bag, even though it looked nothing like the bag that the lady. I don't even know why the lady took the bag because it looked nothing like hers. But anyway, we got it all sorted out. I eventually got my bag back, and the shuttle company paid for the clothes that I bought. So I guess it worked out pretty well. But an odd experience that became odd, not because of the flight, but because of what happened before the flight. Number 10 is an Aeroflot flight that I took in 1998. This was a wild flight. I met my interpreter, Valeria, at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow. It was the wintertime. And she met me in a white sable coat and fur hat, which is another story in itself that doesn't pertain to the flight at all. But we get on the airplane and get settled in, and I am absolutely exhausted because I've been working a lot. I've been traveling a lot, and this is about an 11-hour flight from Moscow to Vladivostok. So I'm just thinking, eat your meal quickly, and then I'm just going to get some sleep. So we get up in the air. First of all, in those days, Aeroflot's training wasn't great, and it was total chaos getting on the airplane. Absolute chaos. But we finally get on the plane. Val and I are sitting next to each other. I'm on the aisle. She's by the window. I eat my meal quickly once we get up in the air, and then I just go to sleep. And it's obvious that I want to sleep. But I don't know how long I'd been asleep the first time. Probably not very long. And I feel a tap on my arm. And I wake up and I look up, and the flight attendant is offering me some type of biscuit or cookie, which I was a little bit annoyed because she woke me up, but I said nicely, no, thank you. And she moved on. I go back to sleep. Sleep a little while. Tap on my arm. I wake up and she's offering me water and coffee. I say, no, thank you. And ask Valerie to tell her that, I'd really like to sleep, so I don't want to be awakened anymore. So Valerie tells her. After a while, I go back to sleep. And we're somewhere, it was hours later, we're somewhere in the middle of the night over the middle part of Siberia. Feel a tap on my arm again, this time a little bit rough. And I wake myself up, open my eyes, and here's the same flight attendant, and she's got green Kool-Aid. And she's offering it to me. And I just looked at her because at this point in time, I'm almost not even irritated. It's almost funny by this time. And so I take the green Kool-Aid, and Val is awake. And I look over at Val and say, have you ever heard about Jonestown? She thought she had. Oh, was that the guy in South America whose followers all drank Kool-Aid and killed themselves? I said, yeah, that's correct. Evidently, they had a little bit of the Kool-Aid left over, and it's right here on this Aeroflot flight. And I held up my green Kool-Aid, and we laughed hysterically for a long time. And so there wasn't any sleep until we were almost to Vladivostok, probably an hour outside of Vladivostok. And I fell back to sleep again. And of course, you know what's going to happen. About 30 minutes later, tap on my arm, wake up, it's time to land. I'd just given up by that point in time. And this flight attendant never broke a smile, never apologized, nothing. She just continued to wake me up. Very, very odd situation. Number 9 is also Aeroflot. There's going to be a pattern here for Aeroflot in the good old days, if you will. Aeroflot's quite a good airline now, by the way. They have very good training. Their planes are very nice. But back in the mid to late 90s, it wasn't that way. So number 9 is Aeroflot 1996. I was flying from Moscow to Krasnodar, Russia, which is down in the southwest part of the country, fairly near the Black Sea. And I get on the plane, and I was actually meeting Val there because she had gone down early. So I was flying by myself from Moscow to Krasnodar. And I'm flying with 2 of my colleagues. I say by myself. I was not flying with an interpreter. I was flying with two of my colleagues, Frank and Winnie Grantham. And first of all, we get on the plane, and this is the bad old days. And a lady sitting behind me has a chicken in a cage sitting on her lap. This was not her emotional support chicken that they had to check. She literally had a chicken sitting on her lap. And so, immediately I sit down, and all I can hear is this cluck, 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 cluck of this chicken. Fortunately, it was not going to be, it was a, 3.5 hour, 4 hour flight. So, I could deal with the, with the chicken from that standpoint. But then Frank and Winnie are sitting next to me. Winnie's sitting in the middle, Frank's sitting by the window. And I realized that Winnie is very fearful of flying. And so she asked me, she said, are you afraid of flying? And I said, no, I'm not really afraid of flying at all. But this was an old plane. It was a decrepit plane. And the flight crew was surly. We were late taking off. And finally we get going. We get up in the air. The weather's not good. We're getting jostled around a lot by turbulence. And I look over, and Winnie is doing acupuncture. She's literally sticking acupuncture needles in her arm to calm down. And at first I thought it was quite strange and funny. But the longer we were on that flight, and the more turbulence that we had, at one point in time, I looked at her and said, "Look, I never have been afraid of flying before. Uh, I'm starting to get afraid of flying now, and I may need your acupuncture needles here in just a little bit." Of course, I didn't, but it was an odd flight with the clucking chicken and the turbulence and the decrepit airplane. The guy in front of me, his seat was broken and kept falling back into my lap. It was a pretty wild flight from Moscow to Krasnodar that day. Number 8 is Aeroflot, again, 1998, Vladivostok to Irkutsk. What made this flight interesting, and I was meeting Val there again. She had already gone to Irkutsk ahead of me. And what made this flight interesting is that I was flying totally alone on this one. And so I navigated, I was flying out of Sheremetyevo. I'm sorry, I was flying out of Vnukovo airport in Moscow this time on a domestic flight. And so I make my way to Vnukovo, which at that time, it's much better now, but at that time it was a very decrepit airport. I get on the plane to Irkutsk, and I think I'm going to be the only person in business class. Super. But right at the last minute, a group of senior military officers gets on the plane. And these guys are drunk when they get on the plane. I mean, and just openly drunk and sitting there with their bottles, chugging away as we're getting ready to take off. We're taxiing toward the runway. They're up out of their seats. They're drinking vodka. They're having just a good time. And very soon they noted that I was there and I was an anomaly. And so one of them that spoke a little bit of English started to talk to me. And I told him I was an American. And before we even got 5,000 feet in the air, they had adopted me. And we were having the best time that you can imagine. They drank the entire flight. They told stories. They laughed. They sang songs. And they just kind of made me one of their crew. And we had the funniest trip to Irkutsk that you can imagine. This is in the winter. Going to Irkutsk, Siberia, which is the nearest town to the deepest lake in the world, Lake Baikal. In the dead of winter, the weather was foul, but they were flying anyway, and these guys were staying warm and just having a good time, and I just joined in with them. And when we got off the airplane, Val was waiting for me in Irkutsk, and we get off the airplane, and these guys are still singing, they're still drinking. A couple of them grabbed me and give me a hug, and Val said, "What went on that flight? What? All these are Army officers. This is very odd." I said, "Val, you wouldn't believe me if I told you what happened. So let's just deal with it another time." But even as we were leaving the airport, these guys are still calling to me and waving. It was a surreal experience on that Aeroflot flight in 1998. Good old number 7. I had to have a few from Afghanistan in here because, you know, some of the experiences that I had with airline travel in Afghanistan, you likely wouldn't even believe unless you were there. Okay, it's a true story, but you can choose to believe it and trust me that it's true if you want to. But I had some odd experiences. So the anomaly in Afghanistan was that you never went to the airport with just one airline ticket because the airlines were notoriously unreliable. So usually I had at least 2 tickets in my pocket to get from Kabul to Dubai, sometimes 3. Sometimes I had a ticket on Ariana Airlines, which was the national air carrier, Comair, which was a private air carrier that served the Kabul, Dubai market, and also Kabul, I think it was Baku, Azerbaijan, and UNHAS, which is United Nations Humanitarian Air Service. In this particular occasion, in 2005, I had two tickets in my pocket. I had an Ariana and a Comair. But I found out before I went to the airport that Comair had already been canceled. So Comair is out. So I get to the airport and the weather is fine. There are no issues. I get checked in for my Ariana flight. And by the way, Ariana Airlines was so broke that they really couldn't pay their pilots. So their pilots made their money off of their per diems and their their uh, their travel payments rather than their salaries. And so that meant that Ariana flew most of the time because if these pilots didn't fly, they didn't make any money. And so you always worried that, even if something's wrong with the plane, they're going to take the chance anyway because they need to make the money. But at any rate, Ariana was notoriously late to depart. So it's a little late and I'm not too worried about it. But then it gets later and later. And I happen to know well the head of Ariana Airlines, who is on the board of directors of the Afghanistan International Chamber of Commerce. And so I gave him a call. And I said, I'm sitting here at the airport. Ariana flight to Dubai is late. Nobody is announcing anything. Nobody's saying why. I've got meetings in Dubai tomorrow. I need to get there. Can you find out what the status is of this of this flight? And he said, Mr. Mark, no problem. I'll find out. So about 5 minutes later, he calls me back and he said, I found the problem. He said, and I told them how to fix it, so everything will be fine. I said, just out of curiosity, what's the problem? He said, well, they had oversold business class by one seat and they didn't know what to do. And so they were gridlocked and trying to determine how to solve the problem. But I told him how to solve it and worked it out. But while he's talking, I'm looking out of the window of the airport. And I see these guys go on the Ariana Airlines plane. And I hear drills because we're very close. The planes are just right outside. It's not like, there's a gate or anything. You walk across the tarmac. And I hear these electric drills. And in a few moments, off comes two business class seats. And these guys carry it to a hangar. A few minutes later, they carry three economy class seats. And they are loading them onto the airplane. And I hear the electric drills again. And then these guys come off the airplane. And almost immediately, they say, we're boarding for Dubai. Like, what is going on? So I had a business class ticket. And I go out, and I walk across the tarmac. I walk up the steps, and I go into the airplane. And they had taken three economy class seats and bolted them to the floor. And so one of the seats in business class was blocking most of the aisle. You could barely squeeze around that seat to go back to the plane because they'd oversold, didn't know what to do. And so they had a guy in business class that was sitting in the aisle the entire time that we flew to Dubai in an economy class seat. This was a decision-making process that happened in Afghanistan all the time. If they couldn't figure out how to do something, they would do it the way they knew how, and it was usually the most complicated or taciturn way. But here we were, flying in business class with one guy sitting out in the aisle in this random economy class seat. There's no way you could have gotten people up and down that aisle very easily because they could barely squeeze by that seat. It was absolutely hilarious to watch the thing unfold. And then there's number 6, UNHAS, United Nations Humanitarian Air Service, 2007. It was my last day in Afghanistan, July 27, 2007. I'm getting ready to leave Afghanistan for the last time to fly to Dubai and then on to my next assignment. By this time, I had been in Afghanistan 3 years, 10 months, and 9 days. And so it was time to go. So, strangely enough, on that particular day, Ariana Airlines is on time for a change. So, we board the plane, and I'm sitting next to my friend Hedvig, who had decided to fly with me on that last flight out of Kabul. So she and I are sitting there chatting, and the door shuts. We're pulling back from the terminal. We're just getting ready to pull onto the runway, and I look out of the window on my side of the plane, and I see a missile coming in, and I hear this, and the missile impacted the hill on the other side of the airport. They immediately shut the airport down. And on my last day in Kabul, I waited 2.5 hours on the tarmac of the runway, waiting to leave. Now, that may sound strange, but what makes it even stranger is that the first time I flew into Kabul in October of 2003, there was a missile attack at the airport on that day as well that closed the airport. So the day I arrived and the day I left, missile attacks delayed my flight. Not Unha's fault. Otherwise, the flight was fine. Got to Dubai and went ahead to my next assignment. But nothing could have been more appropriate than that last day in Kabul being delayed by a missile strike. Number 5, Japan Airlines, 2008. Japan Airlines is a very good airline, by the way. What made this flight interesting was that a typhoon was coming in, and it was coming in fast. And I was traveling with a colleague of mine who was actually on the next flight after mine. I was flying from Tokyo to LA. And there's a lot of the rain is just coming in sheets, and there's a lot of activity in and around the gate area, staff running back and forth, and finally, the announcement is made in Japanese and English. We're loading the plane now, and please load quickly because we have a small window of opportunity to leave before the typhoon. If we miss that window of opportunity, they will likely close the airport. You're going to be stuck here for a while. And so we were moving quickly. It's probably the quickest loading of an airplane that I have ever seen, but it was very precision from a Japanese standpoint. We all got on the airplane, and without very much delay, we pull back from the gate and we headed out to the runway. By this time, the rain is literally pounding us. The wind is up. The rain is blowing almost sideways. And I'm thinking there's no chance they're going to take off. We're going to turn around and go back. But they kept heading toward the runway. And usually on JAL, they have the cameras on where you can actually see in front of you from your seat. You can actually see the movement of the airplane toward the runway, but they turn those off. And so all we can hear is just this roar of wind and the pounding of the rain. And we pull out on the runway, and until we pulled out on the runway, I still thought we're turning around and going back. But they pull out on the runway. I hear the engines kick in, and we take off, and literally we're up off the ground, and the wings are like this. It's the most violent turbulence that I have ever been in on an airplane. And I'm thinking there's nothing good about this. Everybody is scared to death. We are literally just a few hundred feet off the ground, and we're being tossed around like a feather. And the rain is just pounding. And this went on for probably 8 or 10 minutes. And then all of a sudden, we got up above to a certain altitude, and everything settled down. We made our flight to LA without any issues. But that was an absolutely scary situation that I never want to be in again. By the way, my colleague that was on the next flight did not make it. He got to take a several $100 taxi ride back into Tokyo and was delayed for 4 days. So I was very fortunate to get out on that last flight from Tokyo's Narita Airport to LA on that particular day. Number 4, still staying in Asia. Here's a funny one. The first time I flew into Hong Kong was a really surreal experience. Hong Kong built a new airport. I forget what year it was, but they built it on Lantou Island. It's a very nice airport. No issues flying into Hong Kong now. It's very modern. But the old airport was very near the city. And on the approach to that airport, you would literally come down through the city. And I remember the first time and the only time I flew into the old airport in Hong Kong. On the approach, you could literally look out of the windows of your plane and see people sitting in their apartments or hanging up laundry or cooking dinner. That's how close you were to apartments on both sides of you on approach to this airport. It was interesting, surreal, more than a little bit scary, and not something that I would want to repeat. But it was certainly cool to do it one time. But every other time I flew into to Hong Kong, it was to the new airport. So I only got to experience that once, and that was probably enough. By the way, number 3, and actually there are going to be 12 experiences now instead of 11, because I remembered another one I wanted to share with you. But number 3, Saudi Airlines in 2018. I've been working in Saudi Arabia for some time, and it was the end of the project there, and so I had accepted a position leading a 5-year project in Tbilisi, Georgia, and so I needed to fly from Saudi to Tbilisi to do an initial briefing with USAID and the U.S. ambassador on that project, and then I was flying back to finish things up in Riyadh before flying back to the States, picking up Debbie, and flying back to Tbilisi. So the flight from Riyadh to Tbilisi, no issues, have all my meetings, my in brief, everything's good. And then I fly back to Riyadh. Flight out of Tbilisi is on time, it's perfect. But no issues. Saudi is a nice airline, so no issues on the plane. The crew's very lovely. But I see us descending into Riyadh. But it's taken a while, and I'm thinking, why is it taking so long on the descent to Riyadh? And then I see us gaining altitude again. I'm thinking, why are we going back up? So I called the flight attendant over and said, what's going on? She said, well, we're just getting ready to make an announcement. There's a sandstorm in Riyadh, and so we're trying to circle until the sandstorm is over, and that's why we had to regain altitude. So they announced this, and 10 or 15 minutes passes, and they realize that they're going to have a fuel issue. They can't keep circling, and the sandstorm's not dissipating, and so we get rerouted to Medina. Well, Medina is a holy city in Islam, so a non-Muslim can't even get off the airplane. And so we get rerouted in this sandstorm, and we land in Medina, and we're sitting on the tarmac for hours because we can't get off the plane. And it's hot, it's uncomfortable. The flight attendants are doing their best to keep everybody comfortable. But we finally get clearance to fly to Riyadh. We get to Riyadh. By this time, my connecting flight to Paris and then on to the States is getting ready to leave, literally. And so I have I'm supposed to recheck my luggage, and that's going to take some time. And the gentleman there just says, drop your luggage. It has your name on it. Just drop your luggage, go onto the plane. We'll take care of it. I did that, and I made the flight, fortunately. Unfortunately, that we almost never got that bag back. It took months to get that bag back because the guy didn't do anything he was supposed to do, and that bag sat in Riyadh for literally months before finally Delta, who had nothing to do with any of this, was nice enough to intervene because I had so many miles with Delta. They were nice enough to intervene with Saudi Airlines to finally get this bag back after all that time. So that was a crazy experience. And if you've ever flown in a sandstorm where you can see the sandstorm below you, it's an amazing thing, really, because it's like the world just disappears. When we were coming into Riyadh, it was blue sky, blue sky, blue sky, and then all of a sudden, it's like you got somebody threw a sheet over the airplane. It was just everything was just gone, and that's when we were rerouted to a different airport. Number 2, Kenya Airways, 2017. I had to throw some African experiences in here because a lot of times in Africa you don't know exactly what's going to happen. But I will say Kenya Airlines is a nice airline, and so I've got kind of a tie here on. 2 experiences on Kenya Airways. Both of them coincidentally happened in 2017. One was Djibouti to Nairobi. A colleague and I had gone to Djibouti for work, and this was during Ramadan. And Djibouti is a Muslim country, and so we did our work there, and we were getting ready to fly back to Nairobi. So remember, it's Ramadan. So early morning flight to Nairobi. We get to the airport very, very early. And like nothing is going, it's a tiny airport, nothing's going on. Like an American, I got there too early. We had to wait around outside the airport. Finally, they opened the airport. We go in. It's obvious that they broke fast from Ramadan the night before, and they had been eating and drinking pretty much all night, and they were moving slowly. So we finally get through security. We get the boarding pass first, and then we go through security. And we go to the immigration counter. And I'm sorry, I got it backward. We got our tickets. Then we went to the immigration counter. And so there we were, hanging out. Nobody at this immigration counter. Windows empty. We stand there, nothing's happening. Finally, it's a tiny airport, so I look over at the guy that gave us the ticket and said, "Where's the immigration officer?" He's like, "Oh, okay." He goes back to the back, and through the window, I can see a guy in a t-shirt and shorts asleep over in some chairs. The guy that gave us our ticket goes back. He punches this guy awake. He points over at us. So this guy wakes up. He rubs his eyes. He picks up an old, decrepit uniform shirt. He buttons it up. He puts a hat, an old military-looking hat on his head, comes up to the window, stamps our passports, and then immediately goes back over, removes his hat, removes his shirt, goes back to sleep on the chairs. That was strange enough. Then we clear security. We go upstairs to where we're going to meet the flight. There was only one flight leaving. The Kenya Airlines plane was there. It had been there for a long time. But everybody must have known something that we didn't know because nobody is coming. It's literally like 10 minutes before this flight. Nobody's there. No staff, no passengers. And so, again, we finally tracked down somebody. What is going on? Oh, well, they're having difficulty loading the luggage. Like, difficulty loading the luggage? There's only one plane. But finally, after about 30 minutes after we were scheduled to depart, they start to come out with the luggage. They finally get the luggage loaded, and only then do people start showing up. So like I said, somebody must have known something we didn't know, and we headed onto the plane and flew back to Nairobi. It was those kind of experiences where we would just say TIA. This is Africa. That's all you could say because there wasn't any logic to it. There wasn't any way to figure it out. So as a foreigner, you just said TIA. It is what it is, and we're going to enjoy the experience, which we did. The second one, the tie here, also happened in 2017. It was also Kenya Airways. Very, very funny stuff. I was sitting in the airport in Jomo Kenyatta International Airport in Nairobi. It had been a pretty old airport for a long time, and they remodeled it and they added on a new part of the terminal. And I was actually sitting in the new part of the terminal waiting to catch a flight to Amsterdam on KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines. Plane is there. It is a 747 double decker. It's a nice airplane. But right before we got ready to load, a huge rainstorm hit, an African rainstorm. Number one, this new terminal, brand new, just opened a few weeks before, starts leaking immediately. Water everywhere. And the electricity goes out. So now they can't connect the gate to the airplane, and they have people in wheelchairs. It's a bad situation. So we're sitting there in the dark with rain dropping on us in a brand new terminal. And this British guy sitting next to me, and I'll never forget it, out of the dark, I hear him say, "We're screwed." And I just started laughing because the absurdity of it was just unbelievable. Well, finally they decided to load the airplane. They got the people in wheelchairs on somehow. I have no idea how they did it. But we were rushing across the tarmac in the rain to get on this airplane. It took forever to load. And in Jomo Kenyatta Airport, as with most African airports, every single day it's like they've never loaded an aircraft before. It's absolute chaos. They make the announcement, business class is going to go, people with the need special assistance go first in business class. But the minute they open those doors, everybody rushes them. And there's no rhyme or reason to any of it. And so off we go. We get on the airplane. And even with no power, a leaky terminal, no jetway to get you to the airplane, they managed to launch that flight. And I asked one of the KLM flight attendants, because this was pretty early on in my time uh, in um, in flying KLM out of Nairobi. I said, "How often does this happen?" She says, "Often." She said, "You never know what you're going to expect when you're here." And certainly that's the case. Another TIA experience. And now um, we've got number one, United Nations Humanitarian Air Service 2016, Goma to Bukavu, Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we fly from Kinshasa, the capital of Democratic Republic of the Congo, to the east, to Goma. Now, Goma, Eastern Congo, is at that time was very dangerous place. It was a place that most foreigners did not go, but I had business there, and I insisted on going there with a colleague. So we fly into this little airport in Goma on a United Nations airplane, and Goma sits on Lake Kivu, and right across Lake Kivu is Bukavu, and that was our final destination. And literally, you just have to fly across the lake. So they transferred our luggage from the plane to a very small plane that literally would take us across Lake Kivu, maybe 25, 30 minutes maximum, to Bukavu. So they load the luggage. We get on this tiny airplane. You could see the pilots. That's how small the airplane was. It's probably 6 or 8 seat airplane. And we make the flight from Goma, across the lake, beautiful flight, across beautiful Lake Kivu, down to Bukavu. So we land in Bukavu, and there is this small, decrepit airport that is, you know, I would say a typical, what you would think of in Eastern Congo for an airport. And I get off the plane and I walk into the terminal and sit down to wait my luggage. 5 minutes passes, 10 minutes, 15. Think, what's taking so long? It's a tiny plane. So finally, somebody comes in the terminal, and I say, "Where's my luggage?" He looks confused. One moment. He goes out. He comes back. He said, "Sir, we can't find your luggage." So what are you talking about? He said, we can't find it. I look out the window. I can see the plane. They have the cargo door open. I can see my luggage on the plane. I tell him, that's my luggage right out there. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "It's the only plane out there. Of course I'm sure my luggage is there. There is no other plane here. That's my luggage. That's my bag. I can see from right here." And so another 10 to 15 minutes passes. Finally, the same guy goes out. He pulls the luggage off the airplane. He brings it up. He makes a big show out of checking to make sure that it was my bag, even though there were only 2 or 3 passengers and only one airplane there. So finally, he's confident it's my bag. And then he says $10. So what are you talking about? He said, $10 tip. A tip? What? I sat here for almost an hour now waiting on a bag that I could see, and you want $10? And he said, "Yes, yes, yes." I said, "Not going to happen." He said, "5?" I said, "Not going to happen." He said, $1. I said, "Not going to happen." He says, "All right, take your bag." And so I grabbed my bag and walked out and met my driver and moved on. Another TIA experience. This is Africa. I mean, what can you really say? You know? And I guess I'm going to share one more with you that's kind of a tie for number one, because this is the only time I ever took an airline flight with no ticket. This was Comair 2006 from Dubai to Kabul. I was coming back from home leave. I overnighted in Dubai, went to the airport the next morning, went over to the awful Terminal 2 to catch the flight to Kabul. Now, there's a new Emirates terminal there now, which is a fantastic terminal. But then they had Terminal 1, which was a beautiful, beautiful modern terminal. But all the flights to the undesirable locations like Kabul left from Terminal 2, which was not nice at all. You were sitting in there with traders that were sitting on top of huge bags. And I mean, it was flights going to Kabul or to Mogadishu or places that, probably normal expatriates would not want to go. So I go in and I've got a Ariana ticket actually, and I see the Ariana flight is canceled. I'm like, oh, I've got meetings. This is bad. But I figure, okay, my staff can reschedule the meetings in Kabul. I'll spend another day in Dubai, and I'll try it again tomorrow. I'll get a good night's sleep, have a great meal at a beautiful hotel, and I'll try the flight again tomorrow. So I'm just leaving the airport, just leaving Terminal 2. I'm going to catch a cab, go back into the city, and check back into the hotel. But at the door, coming in the door, is Mahmoud Karzai, who is the brother of then president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai. Mahmoud was a good friend of mine. He was on the board of the Afghanistan International Chamber of Commerce. I knew Mahmoud very well. He and I traveled a lot together. So Mahmoud sees me. We greet each other. He says, "Where are you going?" I said, "Oh, they canceled my Ariana flight, so I'm headed back into Dubai, and I'll try it again tomorrow." He said, "But we have meetings tomorrow. I'm in the same meetings you are. It's important that you be there." I said, "Well, but they canceled my flight. What can I do?" He said, "No problem. We'll get you on Comair." I said, "But I don't have a ticket to Comair, and I checked on it, and they said the flight's full." He said, "Forget about it." I said, "Well, okay. Take me up there. If I can get a ticket, I'll pay." He said, "You don't need to pay for a ticket." So what are you talking about? So don't worry about it. Just follow me. And so I follow him. He goes up to the desk, and he explains to them the situation. No problem. They hand him a business class boarding pass. They hand me a business class boarding pass. Send us on our way. And I told him, I said, "But I checked, I tried to check my luggage on Ariana, and they took it, but then they canceled the flight. I don't know where the luggage is." They said, "No problem. We'll work it out." And so we navigated all the way through Terminal 2 to the gate, boarded that flight, flew back to Kabul, and I never had a ticket for the flight. Never paid for anything, never had a ticket. Never had my boarding pass, didn't even have a seat assignment on it. I got on the plane. Mahmoud said, "Sit here by me." And we flew to Kabul. The first and only time I ever took a flight with no ticket and a boarding pass with no seat assignment, because I was with the brother of the president of Afghanistan. Look, I'll tell you, I could go on for a long time with stories of weird flight experiences that I've had, but I think I'll stop right there. I lost track as to how many I shared with you, but I hope that you found them interesting and somewhat amusing. I'm really appreciative of all of the viewers that I have on Some Stops Along the Way. Tell your friends. We're getting ready to start on a supremely interesting thematic area of times of joy and times of sorrow. You're going to like it a lot. So tell your friends, tell them to subscribe, tell them to like the episodes, to make comments. I love to have questions. I'll respond to them. Uh, but until then, just know how much I appreciate you as loyal viewers. And I'll see you next Monday when we'll start a new thematic area on some stops along the way. Have a great week.